great horses come in all different shapes, sizes, and everything else, and great riders do too.
In December, one of our Facebook posts sparked a big debate. Does the USA put too much emphasis on riding position? Is there room for riders to find more fluidity and freedom in their style? Today, we're diving into those questions. Your position in the saddle isn't just about looking pretty for the judges panel. It's about communication, balance, and harmony with your horse. But for many riders, the way position is taught can feel rigid, exclusive, or unattainable, leaving you questioning, am I good enough? Do I fit in here? We are joined by Nicole Shahinian-Simpson, one of only 11 riders in the history to win both the ASPCA Maclay National Championship and the U.S. Medal Finals. As a USEF equitation judge and Grand Prix champion with nearly 35 Grand Prix wins, Nicki brings unmatched experience and a fresh perspective to this conversation. In this episode, Nicki shares how position impacts your horse, why the American equitation system is both inspiring and limiting, and how pressures like perfectionism and body image affect riders. Most importantly, she'll help you create a functional, fluid position that works for you. Whether you're chasing ribbons or trying to feel confident in the saddle, this episode will leave you empowered, validated, and ready to ride your best. Because your position isn't just about looking the part, it's about showing up for your horse.
Dear Horse World, it's Nicki Shahinian-Simpson.
Nicki, welcome to the Dear Horse World podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. We've known each other a long time.
We have.
But we haven't caught up for a long time. You just wrapped a Gold Star USHJ clinic here in Ocala.
I did.
At the World Equestrian Center.
Yes. It was my second year doing it. Yeah. Last year it was hosted at Jim Brandon in Wellington. And this year we had it at the World Equestrian Center. And it was amazing. It's really an amazing program. You start with back at the barn. The kids take care of their horses. Colleen Reed did the barn management. And it's funny because we go way back, and she actually we were in the same barns, and she was managing at Fairfield and whatnot when I rode. So we have a lot of history. And I just find it's just a great program to, we have farriers come in and give a lecture. They got to go to the vet clinic at the Equestrian Center, sports psychology. I stayed and we walked the Grand Prix last night. And it's just so authentic and just a great program. And to see what I enjoyed so much yesterday was seeing the kids put all 3 days together, and we do a flat phase, gymnastics, and then we set a course, and with timers, the whole 9 yards, and they jump around and sort of put it all together. And yet what also is great about that is if there's an issue, boom, you get to go right back in and we fix it, we repeat it, we make it better, which you don't get to do obviously in the show ring. So the kids were just so engaging and asked all the questions, and it was so rewarding and fun for me to see them progress over the 3 days. And they were great students and really coachable, and I really enjoyed it.
So what would you say was the theme? What would be the theme of those 3 days? If you were to summarize what you feel like students were looking for, riders were looking for, and what you felt like evolved in terms of focus.
I always say riding is as complicated or as simple as you want to make it. And really getting back to the basics and build off the basics. We had a 1.10 section, we had a 1.20 section, 1.30 section. So we had all levels. We had a great little thoroughbred horse in there, which was really fun to see. But no matter what, you start and you rely and you start with the basics. And I think putting those fundamentals into it and having them understand that It's not complicated. It's just really not complicated. You know, you've a course of jumps asks you to go forward, shorten, left, right. Yes, we build off that as you go up the levels and the divisions, but that's where it all starts. And position, function, being functional up there. But I also think what's also really important is that we get away from the word of feel. I think you have to feel. And you, as trainers, I think we have to allow the riders to feel what's going on. It's easier for some than others. Some have to develop that, feel. But I think that's also a big focus, is to feel what's going on.
Ooh, okay. I'm so excited. We're already here. Okay. What, in your opinion, is the definition of feel?
Feel. I was fortunate enough to do some reining. It's sort of I would say if I had a hobby, I did some reining. I've done some cutting.
Oh, cool.
So a little bit of, cross training. I think feel is, position is one thing. Function, form, all those things. In doing so, you have to feel what's happening underneath you. You have to feel the horses moving. You have to, there's not one ingredient that works. There's not a book that just says, this amount of pressure, and that you have to feel those things. Each horse is different. Each step they take, each stride they canter, maintaining, you have to feel to maintain. So, it's something that I think also needs to be focused on.
Yeah.
Allowing the riders to feel what's going on while they're in and the structure of the correct form, and I said, okay, form. Well, no one says, walk around slouched and sit in your chair slouched and whatnot. So it's the same thing in riding. You have to hold your, it's an energy. It's a posture. It's so much of riding is also just core strength. Men and women, we're competing equally. This is not about who's the strongest. I wouldn't say there's any advantage or disadvantage to being strong or not. I think core strength and center of balance and all that is really where the focus is.
In the conversations that I've had, both with people within the English disciplines, the Olympic disciplines, and within the Western disciplines, and then in natural horsemanship, there's so much conversation about feel, but there doesn't seem to be an agreed upon definition of it. And when I hear everyone give their own definition of what feel is, I actually think I'm starting to feel like it's actually quite simple.
Yeah.
Feel is the ability to be present and observe with your body and with your mind what is present in the horse moment to moment. Yeah. And then have the tool. So that's
a great definition.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's something, it's almost hard to put into words because it is so simple. That really says it all right there, and I think that's really, really important. I always say to my students, if you don't feel and know what's going on under you, the course of jumps it's just there. It's there. It's in your way. It's not moving.
Yeah.
But if you don't know what's going on getting there, where are you?
So list of priorities. Then.
Yeah.
List of priorities is, and I seem like it always feels like feel and the ability, people say, oh, that rider has a great feel. That rider has tremendous feel. And I always have thought, okay, like, well, what is that? And what do you do with it? Because it's not like if you have great feel, then you will go to the Olympics, right? Because you have to have tools, you have to have skills, you have to have a system, you have to have a program in order to take all of that and do something wonderful with it. But in terms of a list of priorities, in terms of being able to feel what is happening with your horse moment to moment, to be able to be in true symbiosis through your body, through your balance, through your position, and then to be able to then tackle the course or the dressage test or whatever it is that you're doing with your horse that's in front of you. But sometimes, do you think that sometimes riders get that list of priorities jumbled up?
Sure. Absolutely. And I think when you talk about feel, you're also talking about it sounds funny, but feeling the horse's mind. You have to know where they're looking. You've got to know some of their senses. So it goes even deeper into just really allowing yourself to be in touch with the animal. In so many levels, in a simple fashion, though. Again, I'm not, it's not to complicate it. It's just to allow yourself to feel what's going on.
I wonder also too, because there's a lot of emphasis on being in the saddle in our culture. There's a lot of emphasis of, I will get better the more hours I get in the saddle. But I would say that the basics, I'm curious what you think about this, but the foundation of understanding what is going on in your horse's mind is also observing them from the ground.
Absolutely. I know it's funny. I had I have a client that came to me and wants to move up the ranks a bit and whatnot, and she's came from a situation very hands-on, does some cross training as well, and our mom said to me, she would really like to be involved with the horses in the barn. And it really made me think, and I thought, oh my gosh, how refreshing. And yet how our setups, in the sport and our grooms that take care of the horses, they're so programmed to do everything for the rider, for the client. And it was refreshing for me to go to them and say, it's okay. Like, they can take the polos off. They can put the halter on. They can, they can take it out to the paddock. And I think because we get into that service industry, that we take some of that away, and it's like anything, it just becomes the norm. Which again, a whole nother can of worms, but it takes me back to my childhood. I would do anything to go back in time, and it's quite emotional for me, but it's, I would do anything to go back in time. And, I loved every aspect of it, that I think that we get away from. And, those things are really, really dear to me.
What is dear to you?
I think getting back to why we do this to begin with, what has attracted us to the sport, it all comes down to the animal. And I think we get away from that. Just even 40 years ago, it's so different than what it is now. Good, bad, or indifferent. There's that many more horse shows. The amount of competitors is that much more. Everything is a much faster pace. There's shows every single week without fail that you can go to. There's less time for training, less time to really just step back and enjoy the horse, the animal.
When you talk about your childhood, what is one of the most magical memories?
All of it. It's I grew up in New Jersey, right out of New York City, right on the other side of the George Washington Bridge at Overpeck. My parents ran that program there, and then privately leased the facility and ran their business out of there. My mom did the, show jumpers, and my dad did the racehorses. So I had both aspects of it. Lived on the property, walked out, and I was out in the barn before they were even awake and riding around in the feed cart, feeding the horses. And we had a wonderful show horse program, but we also had a wonderful school riding school program. And, the barn was about, 60 something horses.
Wow.
So yeah. And we had my parents did a great thing where we had a great volunteer program also. So it really was sort of the big Overpeck family. And, the door was always open to the house. It was really an extended family. And bringing people together for the same reason of, we love the horses. I could just go on and on about, I don't know that there was one special, just the whole environment.
It feels really like open and warm.
The environment was amazing. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. A lot of ways I wish my kids, they're 27 and 23, could go back in time and
to feel that.
I tried to provide it as best I could, in the sense that, they got a feel for it, but you were always sort of bucking the system in a sense. And I really wish that it was, I could go back in time. I think it's really special. And it's hard for me to describe and hope that someone understands like what it really, really meant to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you mentioned that you've done some cross training, you've done some reining and some cutting. You also mentioned that in the program and in the barn that your family ran, there were thoroughbreds. And something that I'm noticing is a pattern in the generations of riders that I'm having on this podcast that come from a time that I really respect and I think is really important for us as a horse community and a culture to not forget about. One of the resounding patterns is this non-adherence to one way of riding, one discipline. And I'm curious for those who are listening, if they were like, oh, I've jumped horses my whole life, but I kind of want to go try barrels, or I'm a trail rider and I'd really kind of like to try gymkhana, or, what would you say to them?
I think it's phenomenal. I mean, it's funny because my daughter Sophie and my son Ty started much later, but they both actually had reining horses to start.
Did they?
Yeah. And I got them from the Maclays, and so it's funny because Sophie she had Tootsie, and the Maclay, when we were done with her, and Sophie was moving on to the jumping and whatnot, they actually bought her back and had her for another client, and then we had Bugsy for Ty.
Great name.
And it was. And actually, to be honest, I said to Sophie, I was like, Harper, my granddaughter,
yeah,
we call her Buggy. I was like, what a great way for her to start as well. The quarter horses, their minds, and actually Sophie has a reining horse, Sparky, and they ride around together. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. I encourage it. I have 2 clients that do barrel racing. And I think that it's funny because it allows my one client, she's gotten braver and faster in the show ring, and it pushes her to be more comfortable because of the barrel racing. So yeah, it's really fun, and I encourage it. I encourage it very much.
You think it makes you a better rider and a better horseman?
I do. I think it's important to, not only is it fun and a different aspect of it, and but I do think that there's something to learn from it all.
Okay, so this is a cool way to segue into talking about riding position and form and function, because the way a reiner or a cutter is going to sit differently in some ways, and their point of balance is going to be different to the way we are when we're sitting in the saddle and jumping jumps, for example.
And I do have to say to them, we're in the English saddle here.
Yeah.
Get off your pockets and get back, and we laugh. But again, going back to feel,
yeah,
I think they're still feeling something.
I would like, even for my own purposes, to talk about form and function, form versus function, what the actual saying is and what it means. Why do we sit up off the saddle? Because I noticed this now that I'm riding Western, and I'm desperate to ask you this question. I've been riding Western on this trip, but as you know, I'm a show jumper. That's right. My background. And that's what I spent most of my life doing, moving through the hunters, equitation programs, all that kind of stuff. So when I ride, and when I've been riding and trying and moving cows, working with different cowboys, diving into the natural horsemanship, I still have the tendency to ride out of the saddle. Mm-hmm. And the actual idea of sitting in the bucket, sitting on my pockets, is still, it's really hard for me. And especially because my mare has quite a poppy canter, and she's built a little downhill. I naturally want to get up and off her back. Mm-hmm. It's like it's ingrained in me. So when you tell your clients to get off their pockets and adjust their position for what they're going to be doing over fences, why?
I'm more comfortable in the saddle. That doesn't mean that, interesting how I'm going to say this. It doesn't mean that I'm not with the motion.
Yes, totally.
And I guess it's something as simple as you have, some of the equitation riders, they're in that pose position.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily think that the forward seat, we're not talking about posing. I think it is important to break it down even further. And I was saying this in the clinic, you can have a light seat, you can be with the motion, and you can touch the saddle without getting behind them.
Totally.
But I think that in order to do so and be in that forward motion and whatnot, you first have to make sure that the hind end is under you. So, again, it's not just sort of a blanket. There's parts to it that I think that have to be explained so that it does make sense, and, okay, the quarter horses, it's all, obviously it's all from the hind end.
And they are built a little bit more downhill.
Exactly.
They're built differently than
right. So
jumping horses.
The forward motion and being, I always say with the motion, with the motion.
Yes.
When you get to the back of the tack and you put the seat on and whatnot, and the shoulder falls behind, your hip angle, you're in a defensive place.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to be there. Right. I would say, personally speaking, I grew up and I was, fortunate enough to ride many different horses. I did a lot of catch riding, got to work with a lot of different, professionals and trainers, and as a junior. And I rode some difficult horses, oftentimes they were for sale. And you had to never show them what they can't do, never expose their weakness, if they had a little stop, I had to be a little bit on the defensive side of things. Yep. And I realized as, I got older and whatnot, that I had to keep my position in check. I had to make sure that I was very comfortable there. And I had to make sure that I always make sure that I am staying with the motion.
Not behind it, not ahead of it.
Not in that defensive, place. So again, there's different reasons to be in certain positions, but the overall correct place is to be in balance on the center of your horse.
Right. And you know what it makes me realize is I've had the opportunity to ride some of Meta Larson's horses here, and I realized that I sit I sit differently for each of the horses.
Sure.
So this is coming back to having feel and recognizing. So it's not copy and paste position, right? It's okay. What I feel is necessary for one horse isn't going to work for another horse.
Right.
And also depends on the saddle you're in, the tack you're in, where the point of balance, a horse's point of balance to me. And again, I'm not an expert, but like for when you look at reining and cutting, the point of balance is so much more forward than when I think of our jumping horses and how, the point of balance is further back because of what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to jump over obstacles where they have to really power behind.
Right.
So this starts we get to go into form. Okay. So what is the saying? Form and function. What is that saying?
Form and function, and
what does it mean?
Function and form, I guess, really what comes, which way do you say it?
Yeah. Which one's more important?
I guess it's all in the interpretation, and it can go both ways. Hope that's correct.
I sounds correct.
Again, like you said, I think the concept of it is something to build off of. I think that it is very important. An example, Hakuna Matata, Nala. My hard horse. She was unique in many, many ways. Yeah. She was, super hot, went in a hackamore her entire career. And I always said to people, she's way easier than you expect her to be. And they're like, yeah, you're crazy, whatever.
Yeah.
That was a situation. Again, you have to feel what's happening. I rode her with a very, I would say, long rein, watching videos and whatnot. I guess you could say I was a bit behind the vertical.
Or the point of balance.
Yeah. But I was very light on her. But I always knew that my saddle was there underneath me if I needed it. Yeah. So, again, I think I go back to core. Your core strength, your how you distribute your weight, how you distribute your balance, all those things are very much need to be correct.
Yeah.
And you vary slightly from there accordingly.
When you judge, for everyone who's listening, Nicki is a judge and is part of the competitive. Both, I think you judge equitation and
I don't judge often. I was fortunate enough to I judged the Equitation Championship that they have in Florida at the end of season quite a few years ago. I've judged the Washington class when the Washington Horse Show was at Tryon.
Yeah.
And then recently I got to judge the Talent Search East, which was really fun. I did it with Ellie Raitt, and I was quite nervous about it. But I really got into it and I really enjoyed it. And she was wonderful to work with. So that was helpful too. When I was watching, and I have some pet peeves, I can't stand the pose. I can't stand the pose position. You're in a vulnerable position. The horse generally is not up underneath you. And I always say, when you're watching the top level and you're watching, riders gallop down to, meter 60, they're with the motion and they're balanced, they're in position, but they know the hind end's under them. And I think that a little bit is what people lose track of in that posing position with the equitation. Getting back to the equitation.
Yeah.
So again, it's all in how it's taught and not taking one statement and completely going off the rails with it. I think you start with the basic of it, the statement of it, and you build it off of that.
You talk about your pet peeve is the pose. So what are you looking for when you're judging?
Effectiveness. Effective riding. And again, I in my mind, I want the rider to be able to, whether they want to or not, or, it's their goal to jump Grand Prix or not. But I want to see them be connected with the horse, not in a vulnerable position. When you get down to more technical courses, more specific things, the finals, the equitation finals, you have to be able to ride. You have to be able to feel and react and be functional up there. And so I'm not a fan of the posing, hoping that everything's going to go all right.
And do you feel like sometimes we lose sight of, because it feels like what I'm learning from you and even my own experience in equitation, it feels like this kind of tug of war between looking the way you're supposed to look, especially when you're watching people who are winning, you're studying how you're going to be judged and what you're going to be judged on. It feels like there's a tug of war between the way you look and what you're doing, and the way that you and I feel like there's even the social pressure that must exist, especially for young riders. But I feel like, do we run the risk sometimes in having a sort of position-based criteria in some ways? Because that's always how I've thought of equitation.
Right.
And yet it's not that way. And maybe, we have to do a better job as a community in talking about, why does equitation exist?
Right.
And because the courses are technical.
Right.
And that's actually one of the most fun parts about equitation, is actually they're quite dynamic. I would say they're more dynamic than a hunter course. And they're really prepping you to be able to tackle all of all the challenges, all the questions you're going to get in the jumper ring. Yeah.
And that's exactly it. The equitation courses, the Grand Prix courses are just a higher version of equitation courses in that sense. You're asking a lot of the same questions. So the equitation should be an avenue to fine-tune those skills for the bigger picture.
There you go.
And again, the jumpers is not for everybody. Whether it be, you don't want to jump that high, you don't want to go that fast, all those things, but, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. And the equitation has become its own business, and that's fine too. But I do think that it's, what do you want out of it and where do you want to go? And then, accordingly.
Sounds like they should listen to our recent podcast with Dr. Jenny Susser about SMART goals.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't know whether I think one of the greatest antidotes to lacking the big picture, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I competing in this division, is actually sitting down and writing your goals, like your SMART goals for what you want to be doing with your horses as a whole, And I sure wish that when I was doing the equitation that I had done that, because I think I would have been surprised.
Right.
By why was I doing what I was doing? Because so let's talk a little bit. You're a mom, you're a grandmother. So you have been on the front lines of what it means to mentor and raise children in this sport, to raise the next generation. You're judging and training and mentoring the next generation of riders. How do you keep, or what are some sort of resounding lessons that you've learned in trying to help riders, either the ones that you were teaching this past week at the Gold Star Clinic, or your own children? How do you help them navigate keeping the big picture in mind?
I think, again, no matter what, as far as taking the equitation and the jumpers, whether you strive to go as far as you can in the jumpers to the highest level, or maybe the highest level for you is the meter 10, meter 15. Yeah. And that's where you want to be. And there's plenty of championship programs, all the things, which is great. So, but you are you still can have the same upbringing in a sense, and that same training. As far as my kids, they focused. I started very late. We did have him do some equitation. He absolutely hated it, and what was unfortunate was I just wanted him to do it for the discipline of it, but he could not separate the stereotype of what it was, what it should be, what it's supposed to be. He couldn't separate those two things. And
really?
I said, just ride, just go ride. Ride how you would ride, just go ride and ride the course,
Yes.
and it got in his head, and he thought that it was this position that, and I was like,
he was posing.
no, he was posing. He was paralyzed up there. And I was like, no,
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's something you have to focus on, right? You have to focus on. So he has to focus on it every day, his position, all the things that, because he started late and whatnot, he needs to sort of catch up on. So it's an everyday thing for him.
And that's why you wanted him to find the discipline.
Yeah, the discipline of it. So, and then there's, my daughter, Sophie did the equitation, all along. And
did she struggle with that same?
Yes and no. I think, again, our culture of it, the social media of it, what you think it's supposed to be, gets derailed a little bit. And that's why it's so important to emphasize to the riders, you have to still ride. This is not put the coin in and things get judged a certain way. The horses have to go a certain way, all those things. But I think ultimately when you are talking about going on in the sport, to the next, level and to the jumpers, I think that you really have to keep those things in check.
That's wild. So did you have that experience? Because you are very unique. You are one of only 11 riders to have won.
Is that right?
Yeah, the Maclay.
Maclay and the medal.
And
90 and 92.
That's
a long time ago.
Yeah, only 11 people in the sport have ever done it.
At that time, it was, I was sort of did a lot of catch riding, was, one of the top junior riders, what have you. So there was a lot of expectation put on me and a lot of pressure. I was always on a borrowed horse, which I was very thankful to have the opportunity to even get to have. So there was a lot of pressure. So on my own personal side of things, it was very, very stressful. But the discipline of it, for example, the year I won the Maclay finals, the first line was basically 3.5 strides.
Oh,
yeah. And I want to say Michael Matz and maybe Christine Tauber. Michael Matz for sure, maybe Christine Tauber were judging. And I was on a wonderful horse, Black Ice, who was on loan to me. And he had a little short stride on the right lead, and he actually had a little vision issue in one eye. And I was like, there is no way I can bust down there in 3 strides. I mean, there's just no way. You have to do 3. And at that time I had a lot of input. Tim and Michelle Grubb,
cool.
Leslie, and Brian and the whole Fairfield crew.
Cool.
So anyway, I had a lot of trainers and we had fun with it, and everyone's going back. She has to do 3. She can't do 3. She's got to do 4, back and forth. And I'm just like, whatever. And so again, you get trapped into this, well, it has to be that number. And I was like, you know what? I'll be 3rd, 4th, 5th, whatever, but I'm not going to go down there and just chip, know that I cannot do 3 strides. So anyway, I was like, all right, cantered in, did the fourth stride,
Yeah.
canter around, whatever.
And that's when you won.
That's what I won. And I think that's an example of sometimes in the equitation, the way that it has developed, the way that the expectations and whatnot, we get trapped into doing certain things and not allowing the rider or the horse to do what's right for them.
Problem solve.
Yeah.
It's like you almost get socially pressured into like rigid thinking.
Yeah. And it has to, it has to be a 5. It can't be a 6. It has, and again, when you take the jumpers and you're walking the Grand Prix course, a certain line maybe needed to be done in a different stride, suiting your horse.
Of course. If you were to walk that line, not in an equitation class, but if you're going to walk that line in a jumping class or jumper class, of course you'd have the choice.
What is going to suit my horse to provide the best jump? And I think that, again, everything evolves, and the equitation, I am a huge supporter of it, done correctly.
And done with a bigger picture in mind.
Done with a bigger picture in mind. And I think that's important. Really important. And another like sort of pet peeve of mine, as far as I don't really get into, I always feel like I walk the Grand Prix course and they build it, we jump it.
Yeah.
I mean, no sense complaining about it or, this, that, and the other, but what have you. They build it and we're supposed to solve
jump
the
it.
problem.
Yeah.
Within reason. So, but one thing I'm not a fan of is having a time allowed and having that time allowed dictate what strides you do.
Oh.
And you'll come up with that sometimes, where it's the time allowed is so tight. There's always a place on course where, that you're going to, from start to finish, you got to pick away at the time the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been in situations where, you have an oxer down to double verticals and it's 5.5 strides or something. And you feel like you can't do 6 strides because it's going to take just that much more time. And yet that's the right number for the horse. So, something like that is, I find a bit irritating, when you have those options all around the course and you're kind of forced to do a number that is maybe not suitable for your horse. To back that up to the equitation, again, I think approaching some of the courses with a little bigger picture in mind, but it goes back to, you're being judged and what they expect, and goes back to body type, right? There are phenomenal riders out there, phenomenal equitation riders that are not what you expect to be tall, long, lean, long-legged, all the things. And they're fantastic riders. They're not as tall. They're not as fine boned. They're, what have you. And they're fantastic riders. Why is that knocked?
Whoa.
Again, it's
Do you
like
think that
anything.
needs to evolve? Because if we are to create more accessibility, and I would say on a wider cultural level outside the horse world, body image, healthy relationship with one's body is
very important.
Is a super important component to our overall health as individuals.
Yeah.
And if we're not healthy, then I don't think we're optimal for our horses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the mindset or the frame of mind or the basis or the standard of our expectations of a rider's body within sort of equitation, do you think that needs to evolve?
I do. I don't think that there's any reason it can't and it shouldn't. Great horses come in all different shapes, sizes, and everything else, and great riders do too. It goes back to, you know, your own personal health, fitness, function. But I don't think that it should be criticized so hard that, well, you don't have that equitation
Look.
Well, it's just a look. And if you can ride, you can ride.
It makes me think of like how many, if there are riders that have gone through the system that have maybe put their riding boots away, hung up their hat and thought, okay, well, I'm not the right body type and I'm not celebrated for my look and style and feel. So maybe it's better I become a lawyer or whatever, right? And how many, you know, I know I'm going to use him. And for anyone who's listening, if you know who Roger Eve Bost is, like he's a wonderful example. He would have failed miserably in the American equitation system. Yeah. And yet I've heard many great, both American and non-American riding minds watch him and say that he has perfect point of balance. He knows exactly the balance.
He knows exactly where it is. He knows the feel of the horse. It's not something you would try to mimic because he has a real talent for that. Yeah. You know, you are hard pressed to be in a jump off with him and you know, all those things are super interesting, you know, super interesting.
And important. I think it sounds like, it feels like it's important for us to talk about, right? That like, one, to celebrate lots of different types of riding, and for the next generations to come to keep the big picture in mind and to remember that feel is the top of the pyramid. Yeah. More than anything else. Yeah. Feel is the top of the pyramid, not how they look. The copy and paste position. Right. Actually detracts from your ability to ride. Right. Right. And I think like we can do more to create a supportive conversation about how riders are even mentoring themselves. How are they talking to themselves? Right. Because if you think of how Ty felt, here he is, his mom is an incredibly accomplished American rider that went through the system, is won 35 Grand Prix or something like that, right? Well respected, highly admired, and yet he still felt pressure to have a copy and he got in his head. Yeah. And it is a tremendous, like, if anything, I wonder whether the equitation system actually just introduces young riders to a tremendous amount of pressure and stress. Yeah. Which they're going to have to inevitably manage if they are to move up the levels.
And that is, you know, the equitation, that's another aspect of it where, yes, there's a positive in the sense that the finals are stressful, you know, and you know, on so many aspects of it, you know, you know, you're getting there a little wrong. You can't just quick and fix it and not be counted, you know, it counted against you. Right. So it's the discipline, it's the mental discipline. It's all those things that, yes, you know, you're riding on a team, you're, you know, last to go in the jump off, you're whatever it may be. It's training you for that pressure. So there's a lot of very good things that it trains you for. But I go back to not only how things are judged. I think it's important, and again, you get into it in the hunter industry, right? Yeah. You know, we've gotten, the hunters have turned into, when you look back at the history, it's so far gone. Yeah. And again, what came first? Is it because of the judging? You know, what aspect of it? And I think the same thing in the equitation. If we understand better what we want to accomplish and the riders we want to develop, you know, we would have more of them probably.
So I had a really interesting conversation a while back with Helena Stormans about how the breeding of horses has informed so much of how the business has been shaped in terms of how the types of horses we spend, the business spends a lot of time breeding horses that are good for amateurs, because amateurs are the number one client, like they're the number one, I'd say the number one contributor to the economy
Sure.
of horses in a lot of ways. So there are these kind of undercurrents of influence that exist within the different sub-communities, sub-sports of the horse world. Breeding is one. Judging is the other.
Yeah.
And it's incremental. It's like it's what they call like incremental impact over time. So small changes over time have tremendous impact.
Sure.
So as judges, we have hunters that are subjective, equitation that's subjective, dressage that's subjective. These are actually fundamental influences in how things are going, in what direction.
Right.
And yet there are a group of individuals that have, preferences, and they prefer certain things. And actually, like, it's almost like it's a slow steer in a particular direction.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder what you think about that.
When I grew up, you did the hunters, jumpers, equitation. My trainers did all of it as well. So, and that was a very common, and you were the hunters and jumpers as professionals, you were equally as successful in both. I feel like a little bit now.
Is that true? That there were riders that you were having equal success in hunters as you were in the jumpers?
Oh yeah. I mean, Leslie Howard, who I, at Fairfield and who I trained with as a junior. I mean, she was a phenomenal hunter rider. And obviously we all know that, a phenomenal Grand Prix rider. You had that Katie Monahan. I mean, the list goes on, all those, the what I call, the traditional, I don't want to say old timer riders, but what I mean?
We talk about godfathers of natural horsemanship. They're like the godmothers of
absolutely
American riding styles, system, so much of that. Yeah.
I did obviously, all three in my junior career, and then as a professional did the hunters and jumpers. And it's like you said, over time, I have focused more on the jumpers. The way I run my business just is more suitable in the sense that it's more of a boutique business. I don't have, it's more hands-on, one-on-one. The other aspect of things that actually I would take the time and what I would find super interesting is talking to judges and understanding what they like, what they don't like. A horse trips. Why is that such a huge issue? Just whatever. They trip for whatever reason. They, things happen, right? And, it was always like when we went through the Maclay regionals, and I remember as a kid, it was like you just held your breath that nothing bizarre, weird, out of the ordinary. Your horse, shakes its head the wrong way, and you're done, right?
Yeah.
And you don't qualify, to go to the finals. So it's I think it would be nice to be able to have dialogue more open with judging and with judges, and from a learning aspect and an accountability aspect too.
Yeah.
And maybe, why are they so hard on certain things that really don't matter?
Well, and I think that would apply to more than just hunters and equitation. I think the dressage world would love to know.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I could imagine. Yeah, I could imagine.
Seeing the discussions of like why some horses, they rank higher, yet they're behind the vertical, even at the Olympic level. There were there was lots of discussion. This is where social media is really interesting. There's a lot of discussion after the Paris Olympics about, okay, why did that combination get ranked higher than the other combination when the horse spent over 50% of the test behind the vertical? Right. Shouldn't we be ranking that
Right.
lower.
Right.
You know, and then and I think the horse world has lots of questions, and I don't know if we have lots of answers.
Right.
You know, and then I think that what happens, and this is something I would say to even the FEI is, well, if there's more questions than there are answers, most people in the world respond to that with apathy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I think, one of the things that everyone's so worried about.
Right.
Is for the world, both the horse world itself and the wider world, to become apathetic to what we do. But if there are more questions than there are answers, and there's a lack of transparency, then I think apathy is usually the automatic response, because it's like self-preservation. People
Right.
just go, okay, well, I'm going to care less because there's more confusion, and the energy to understand it is too much
Right.
for my busy life.
Sure.
You know, I got to pay my mortgage and watch my kids at their soccer game.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time.
It is.
Like
It
an
really
inflection point almost.
Yeah. It's a great sport, and it's, you know, to see some of the riders and you know, the athletes and the horses out there. I mean, it really is an incredible sport that we do.
So to wrap up every episode, I have rapid fire questions. If you could read one book to the horse world, what would it be?
Champion-minded. Alistair McCaw.
Cool.
You know, I like to pick up books that relate to not only in the sport, but also life in general.
Cool.
You know?
Yeah.
And I focus a lot on that. Podcast, stuff like that. Yeah.
So we'll include in the show notes that book.
Yeah.
Who is the most iconic horse in history, in your opinion?
What comes to my mind about a horse would be Gem Twist.
Ooh.
And in that's one that I would have loved to have ridden. Love its way of going. You know, I just, yeah.
Most undervalued skill as a rider?
Most undervalued skill. I think the mental aspect of riding. I think riding is 90% mental, to be honest. I think that where we can go in our own head, how we can psych ourselves out, probably not enough emphasis gets put on.
Who is the greatest horseman or horsewoman in history?
There's a lot of answers.
Then you can have more than one.
Actually, I'll tell you a little funny story
Great.
About this. Growing up, you know, when you're doing the people jumping and whatnot, and I used to say,
people jumping, what do you mean?
You know, like you have the little jump set up and you're
on
foot.
Yeah,
you know,
as a kid.
As a kid.
Okay,
as a
cool.
kid.
Yeah.
And so, you know, growing up at Overpeck, and we hosted, I think it was 1980. I was 6, we hosted it was one of the Olympic trials or something like that. And anyhow, long story short, you know, I'm this young kid with, you know, all Melanie Smith and Rodney Jenkins and Leslie Burr and,
Cool.
You know, Howard. And so all these, you know, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And anyhow, when as a youngster, when we would do the people jumping on foot, you know, we would always be somebody. And I said, you know, I'm Leslie Burr. I'm Leslie Burr. And my friend would say, I'm Katie Monahan, and, you know, whatever. Fast forward.
Yeah.
And when I started riding with Leslie, I told her that story. And you know, it's just so, again, such a cool moment of, you know, looking up to great riders and then being able to work with them.
That's so cool.
Yeah, really fun. But I mean, there's just so many that, you know, I remember as a youngster that I wish that I could see now and really know what I was looking at, you know, and watching.
Last question. Mares, stallions, or geldings?
Ooh. Mares, stallions, or geldings. Funny. I went through a period of time where I had mostly geldings, I would say, you know. And then it was a complete turnaround, and for the last, I don't know how many years now, I have had mostly mares.
Yeah.
And Circa Z was a phenomenal stallion that I had, and I don't really have I would never shy away from one or the other, or one of the three. A good horse is a good horse. I think you have different characteristics that shine in each. Mares, there's nothing like a good mare. They're fighters. They'll go to the end of the earth for you. They will also be the biggest thorn in your side, if not respected.
So true.
Or isn't that so, across the board?
Yeah.
But, geldings are a bit more level-headed, forgiving. Stallions never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But, good stallions and with their focus in the right place, phenomenal. Gorgeous.
Truly.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. But mares, I've had a lot of really good mares, and I have a barn full of mares right now.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It's a lot. It's been like that. It's funny. We commented on that. It's been like that for a few years, and I'm like, my gosh, we have all mares. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Nicki, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. It was wonderful, and I really, really appreciate you having me. Fun stuff to talk about.